We are live.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the May Planning Committee meeting. Lisa, have you taken the roll call?
Through the chair, roll has been taken.
All right. Does anybody have a pecuniary interest that they need to make regarding any of the items on today's agenda? Please physically raise your hand. Doesn't look like we have any. So just as a reminder, we have two statutory hearings this morning, and they are handled separately, one following the other. We have no items for consideration, although we may have a resolution that comes onto the floor after we deal with the two planning matters. But looks like, Lisa, we don't really need anything separate except for minutes, right? So if I can have a motion then to approve the minutes of the April 18th, 2024 meeting of the Planning Committee to be approved. Moved by Councillor McCurry, seconded by Councillor Carpenter. So, please take the vote. I'm a yes.
The minutes carry on a recorded vote of 5-0. Those voting in favor, Councillor Sokoli, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg. Those opposed, or those, and Mayor Davis. And, I apologize, Councillor Sless, your vote?
Yes, I was the affirmative.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now move into the statutory public hearings, and I do have to read an explanation of what we're doing. So we do have two public meetings on today's agenda. The public meeting is held in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. And the purpose of the hearing, in accordance with the Planning Act, is to discuss the planning application and to hear from the public either in support of or against the application. At the end of each statutory hearing, the committee will then consider a recommendation, which is then generally considered for a final decision at the next meeting of council, which typically is the last Tuesday of each month. The name of anyone who speaks in regards to any item will appear within the meeting minutes. Anyone wishing notice of any further proceedings regarding the planning application should also provide their name and address to the clerk's office. We ask that members of the public in attendance today that want to speak to an item, please ensure that your contact information is added to the sign-in sheet, which is located at the back of the room. So the procedure we follow is this. The applicant, the owner of the building or property, speaks first. That's then followed by municipal staff and then the public. Each person presenting has up to 10 minutes to speak, inclusive of any questions from the committee members. At the end of all of that, the applicant is then given up to 5 minutes to provide clarification to any questions or issues raised during the portion where planning staff are making their presentation out of the public. As a reminder, the following rules of decorum as set forth in the city's procedural bylaw apply. 1, no person shall display any sign, banner, placard in the meeting room other than materials that, in the opinion of the chair, are legitimate audio-visual aids necessary in connection with any presentation that's made to the committee. All persons present shall use polite and respectful language and shall refrain from the use of any language or the making of any gesture that is disrespectful or offensive. All persons addressing the committee shall speak only on the subject that's in debate and shall not speak on any other subject. No person shall applaud participants in the debate or engage in any conversation or behavior that may disrupt the proceedings of the meeting. So we'll now move on to consider the very first item. And the title of this item is Zoning Bylaw Amendment PZ0124. It's in regards to a property at 310, 320 North Park Street. So I'll now call upon the applicant or the agent for the owner to come forward to speak to the committee regarding the application. Just a reminder, you have 10 minutes to make your presentation. And if you please state your name and your address for the record.
Good morning, Mayor Davis and members of committee. My name is Brenda Case. I'm from GSP Group and I represent the owner, Leschuk Developments. With me here today is Mike Leschuk, the owner.
Yeah, good morning. Mike Leschuk, 16 Kershaver Terrace in Brantford.
And also with me today is the from the architect, Zed Architects. I have Sasha and David was possibly being on screen. In addition, we have Erica Bailey, who is our transportation engineer, and she's here to answer questions should anyone have any regarding traffic. Next slide, please. And the next slide. Next slide. There. As you all know, I'm sure you all have been to this site a number of times. But I thought I'd provide you a little bit of context. So directly north, you can see the Northland Gardens development, which is a 70-unit, two-story townhouse development with an access driveway that runs parallel to the north lot line of the site. To the east, we have apartments which range in height from 7 to 12 stories. To the west, we have the Hayhurst Village condominium development, and the parking lot and underground parking structure immediately abuts our western property line. That development is a 4-story apartment development, condominium development. And then finally to the south, we have a retail plaza, which is basically 1 story in height. And it includes Shoppers Drug Mart, some restaurants, an ethnic grocery store, and other commercial uses, local commercial uses. So the site overall is relatively flat. There aren't significant grade changes. It does slope to the back. With respect to vegetation, we have some existing trees along the west and south property lines. A tree preservation plan has been undertaken, and we're looking at basically saving 11 trees along the west and south property line. The remainder are either they have symptoms of disease or defects and are recommended for removal. Next slide, please. So further to the north, we have generally a low-rise residential community with singles and semis. To the south, we have the Wayne Gretzky Sports Center. We have several parks and schools that surround this area. So overall, it's a low-density residential area in the wider community. But when we get to North Park Street, we have larger parcels and we have larger blocks of land. So the site itself is well serviced with proximity to retail stores, restaurants, grocery stores, community facilities. The Linden Park Mall is further to the east. So all in all, it's a great centrally located location. Next slide, please. Now we're getting to our proposed development. So this is a site plan. So you're looking down on the development. And what we're looking at is roughly 282 residential units between 2 buildings. They're 1 and 2 bedroom units that we're proposing at this point in time, ranging in size from 50 to 100 meters squared roughly, which is about 500 to 1,100 square feet in size. We have ground floor retail space in both buildings and outdoor amenity spaces in the form of rooftop amenity areas, as well as indoor amenity spaces in the form of a gym, as well as multi-purpose rooms, and each unit will have its own balcony. In total, 304 parking spaces are proposed. That is 1 per unit, as well as parking for the commercial uses and visitors. No parking variance is proposed or required as a part of this development. We comply with the zoning bylaw with respect to parking. Next slide. So this gives you a better idea of what we plan to build, not hope to build, what we plan to build subject to approval. So the building is massed in such a way that we have a defined podium. That means the bottom part of the building. And on one building, it's 4 stories in height. And the one on the left is 4 stories in height. The one on the right is 3 stories in height. They're both located in a strategic location. So they have a prominent presence along North Park Street, which contributes to a strong urban edge. So we're talking about new urban development with a strong urban edge that is pedestrian friendly. The bases for both buildings are designed to be in close proximity to the property line to allow for easy access to the commercial units that will be along the ground floor. But the ground floor itself is pulled back 6 meters. So we've got the property line, and then the ground floor is set back 6 meters to provide for a colonnade. So it would be covered with a roof. The 2nd story is above it to provide protection for the shoppers, as well as to create a nice area. If we had a restaurant in there, you could have an outside patio. We can provide more street furniture and those types of things. Both street facades consist of architectural facade treatments, canopies, and extensive glazing, which allows for visual interaction and creating a welcoming and engaging environment. The space between the curb and the building facades along the street offer room for softscape and hardscape treatments, featuring walkway connections to the building and the sidewalk, as well as bike racks. Through the site plan approval process, that space will be more clearly defined with planters and other types of amenities. Next slide, please. This slide gives you an idea of what the colonnade, with that type of, what I mean by that in terms of the roof that's covered. So you can see here, this is the space between the two buildings, but that cover that you see there wraps around the building and along the frontage as well. So it provides a nice, safe pedestrian area separated from the street as well as the driveway. Next slide, please. In terms of the amenity space, this image shows you what the rooftop amenity space would look like. It includes gazebos, planting structures, we get small canopy trees. So we're looking at this to be a key amenities feature for both buildings. And they are located on the rooftop for the first building, which is to the south. It will be located on rooftop levels 5 and 13, whereas the northern building, which is lower in height, the rooftop amenity spaces are located on levels 4 and 8. Next slide. From an official plan perspective, based on the 2051 official plan, the site is located within the residential land use designation. And that designation permits mixed-use buildings greater than 6 stories in height, subject to a set of criteria. So the set of criteria loosely summarized there, it's section 5.2.1M of the official plan. It identifies that the site has to be a suitable size for the development, providing enough space for landscaping, amenity features, buffering, parking, etc. So that is something that would be evaluated by staff. In addition, the city encourages high-rise buildings with structured parking. A large part of the parking will be provided within the 2 buildings, as well as surface and a parking structure at the back. And it needs to be located in a highly accessible location, accessible to public transit along a major collector road. So in this case, we meet those criteria. We are within less than 250 meters from public transit. We're close to various community amenities and features, which I discussed at the beginning. So basically, the proposed use and height conforms to the official plan. An official plan amendment is not required for this development. Next slide, please. So why are we here? So the zoning bylaw, the existing zoning bylaw 16090 zones the site in the C10 Community Center Commercial Zone. We're not looking at changing that zone. We're looking at modifying it. So the C10 zones allows mixed use developments in certain areas. And that map that you see there is within the zoning bylaw, and it identifies where C10 zones for mixed use developments are permitted. So our site is not one of those sites. So we are requesting that we be included, that a mixed use development be allowed on this site. Next slide, please. This slide shows you where the modifications are proposed. So number 1 at the top, at the northern boundary of the site, we need to have a side yard setback modification. Number 2, which is at the western rear yard of the site, we need a zoning modification for that rear yard building setback. And number 3, we also require a rear yard setback modification to address the location of the 1-story parking structure. Next slide, please. So let's start with height and the mixed use. So building number 1, we're looking at a 16-story building, and building number 2 at the north side, we're looking at a 9-story building. That image at the top right-hand corner illustrates the line. So the red line is what the zoning allows right now, a 6-story building. Whereas the lands at the portion of the building that is above that red line, where the blue line extends, that is what the zoning bylaw amendment is for. But the blue line demonstrates that the official plan allows that height. So we're looking at it on a site-specific basis. Is this height appropriate at this location? So it's permitted subject to criteria, but we have to ensure, based on the modifications we're requesting, that that height is appropriate. So we're requesting a mixed use at this location. And if from our perspective, based on the community context, we think this is a great location for a mixed use development. There's commercial development on it right now with a sea of concrete parking. What we're looking at is providing a more active development with more active street frontage commercial uses and residential units above. Next slide, please. Now, often residents are concerned about shadow impacts of the development. So the consulting team undertook a shadow study, and it was based on the city's site plan manual guidelines for shadow studies. So based on those guidelines, the impacts of the shadow impacts of the proposed development on the townhouse development to the north, as well as the condos to the west, all meet the city standards. So when I say no impacts, it doesn't mean there's no shadows. It means there's no unacceptable impacts based on the city's criteria. And I'm going to go into a little detail in the next couple of slides, just to give you an idea, but there is a detailed shadow study.
Sorry, Brenda, I'm going to have to interrupt you. for a minute,
Yes,
Because we've hit 10 minutes. Can I have a motion to extend a further 10 minutes? Moved by Councillor Carpenter, seconded by Councillor McCreary. Any discussion? Lisa, please take the vote.
The motion to waive the rules for an additional 10 minutes carries on a recorded vote of 6-0. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Secoli, Sless, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg.
Sorry to interrupt, Brenda. Continue.
thank you very much, Mayor. I want to make sure I can address some of the comments that the residents may have had. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this slide, it's not easy to tell, but this is the spring equinox, which is one of the ones that we have to address in our shadow study. So the shadow, this shows that to the north townhouses, it has no impacts until 2:30, but there's still 5 hours of sunlight, of unobstructed sunlight to the north. To the west, we have partially shaded between 9 and 10 a.m., but other than that, there's no impacts and there's full sunlight for plus 5 hours. So you need to understand that on either March 20th or September 21st, sorry, March 21st, September 21st, the sun is at a certain location and it moves. So the shadow will move as a result of that. Next slide, please. The next one is the summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year. And this demonstrates that there are no impacts to either developments based on the guidelines. So based on the summertime shadows, there should be no negative impacts from shadows. Next slide, please. The winter solstice, this plan shows that this is when shadows are their longest. The days are the shortest, but the shadow again moves. We have partially shaded between 9 and 10 a.m. to the west, but there's still 5 solid hours of sunlight, unobstructed sunlight. And to the north, the townhouses are partially shaded as well. Again, this is the time of year when fewer people are outside, the days are shorter, and that's why the shadow impacts are acceptable from the city's criteria. Next slide, please. I'm just going to quickly go through the site-specific modifications we're looking for. Let's start with number 1, which is the interior side yard setback at the north end of the site. Next slide, please. What this slide shows you is that the variance that we're requesting is 7.5 meters versus 6 meters versus 7.5 meters. The reason we had to shift the building further to the north was our access driveway was located too close to opposing access driveways on the east side of North Park Street. So by shifting the access in between the two buildings further north, we ended up needing a small variance at the north end of the building. But what I want you to understand here as well is that this particular side yard abuts the access driveway to the townhouses to the north, which is their parking lot and their access driveway. Next slide, please. The remaining 2 variances pertain to the setback of the parking structure, as well as the one at the bottom left there, which is the building setback from that corner. That's the pinch point. So we're going from required 7.5 meters to 6 meters on at the pinch point, but 3.3 meters where the parking structure is located. Now that is a variance from 7.5 to 3.3 meters is larger than we'd like it to be. But the fact is that area backs right onto a parking lot and the underground parking structure of the Hayhurst development to the west. So in terms of the impacts to the residents' balconies, it's not going to impact them negatively. We're looking at putting a solid board fence along that lot line, as well as plantings. So that particular parking structure is only 1 story in height, and we can deal with the details at the site plan approval stage in terms of the construction of that building, as well as what type of plantings and fencing would be appropriate along there. Next slide, please. The last variance deals with loading spaces. So based on the current zoning, we're required to 1 loading space per building, so 1 on each side, as well as 1 commercial loading space. So in this instance, we believe that 1 loading space per building is sufficient for the commercial spaces as well. So they're going to share the loading space with the residential building. The loading space is internal to the building, so that will be more appropriate for the commercial units as well. Next slide. So we did have a community open house. It seems like a very long time ago. It was held in December of last year, and there were 14 residents that attended. We provided flyers to residents within 160 meters of the site, and the meeting was at the Bramer House School, about 800 meters south of the school. So we had quite a lively discussion at the open house. The majority of the issues in my mind related more to the construction, the future construction. They related to construction noise and dust, the impacts of the parking facility, their underground parking facility on our construction. There were traffic concerns which were addressed at the meeting by our traffic consultant, and there was a discussion about the style of the building. Next slide. So in summary, our proposed zoning bylaw amendment once again conforms to the official plan. We're seeking some modifications to the existing C10 zone to allow for the increase in height and the mixed-use development, as well as some site-specific modifications for the north side yard setback and the rear yard setbacks. And finally, a reduction in the required loading spaces from 1 to 0. And that's it. So respectfully request the committee's consideration, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you. When do you plan to be in the ground if all approvals are in place? And what assurances do we have that you are actually going to build this building?
It's a really good question. What I can tell you is that we're one of the only developers that's local that does build high-rise buildings, and we want to go in the ground when all of the conditions are right. That means economic conditions. The property is leased out to current tenants, of which we both have to be acknowledgement of our commercial obligations, both tenants and landlord. So all of those things would need to be sorted out. As soon as all of those conditions match up, we would go in the ground.
I was encouraged that you were local, by the way, as it gives me some assurance that it's actually going to happen. So that's now you've got 2 buildings on site. These are going to be condominiums. Are they going to be building 1 and building 2? Are they going to be separate condominium corporations then? Because you're going to build them at different timeframes?
The plan right now is it'll be a single standard condominium corporation
For all of it?
for the whole development. That's correct.
Including the commercial?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's better for the condominium corporation as well. That's
right.
That's good to hear that as well. One more question, Mr. Mayor. The fencing, you talk about the fencing along the backside, the Hayhurst Village. Currently, there's no fencing there, and it's been a problem for, I know the Ward 3 Council will speak to the issues they've had over the past with access points there. But when you talk about the fencing, you talk about a commercial wood fence then, are you?
Yes, a solid board fence.
Yeah, and maybe we could work with our with our building department, who's for some reason got a 7'2" height restriction when 8 feet, who throws away 10 inches on every board? And 8 feet would make more sense. Would that be completely around the site? I'm not looking for it on the commercial site, but the northern side of the property as well?
Yes,
Okay, so northern side and then the Hayhurst side would all be fenced,
correct,
and you would put some kind of greenery around there to help that out.
correct.
All right, that's it for me. Thank you. It's a very impressive design, I must say.
Councillor McCreary.
Mayor, thank you. Welcome, folks. What other work have you done in the city of Brantford?
In the city of Brantford, we did many years ago, the plaza, we first brought the first big box stores to Brantford, and Keg Restaurant, Scotiabank, and Best Buy. That was our first commercial site that we did here. And most recently, we finished the Landing condominiums, which is next to the new fire hall on Fairview.
So that's the building you see when you get off the highway.
That's correct.
Right, okay. Thank you.
And Dan, just Councillor McCreary, we've been in the development business for over 22 years and developed all over Ontario, all styles of projects, subdivisions, apartment buildings, condo buildings. So a wide variety of places, and we have a long successful track record of completing projects.
So would we probably expect to see familiar names on the side of the building for the contractor and subs?
Very likely.
Okay, now, at the meeting, I think Councillor Martin and I were at the meeting, weren't we? Yeah, it's been a long time. Some of the residents in the Hayhurst condominiums had concerns about the look of their property while this construction is ongoing. And if I recall correctly, namely, it was keeping dust off their property and providing car wash opportunities for them. You're committed to that, right?
Yes, Councillor McCreary, we are committed to providing many car washes, especially during the time where we've got ground exposed. But beyond that, at some point, you know, the dust level does disappear, and it is
Sure.
interior construction. And as well, we did commit to solid hoarding, which is the barricade around the construction site, which does help mitigate dust transmission between neighboring properties.
Now, are you amenable to concluding a separate agreement with them to contractually bind yourself to do those things?
I think that happens regardless of site plan, through the site plan process.
Okay, we'll verify that, Mr. Leschuk, okay? Now, the other thing,
Sorry to interrupt, Councilor McCreary, but we've hit the other 10-minute time limit. So I'm going to ask the committee either give us a resolution to extend another 10 minutes or maybe even suspend time limits for the purpose of today's meeting for all applications. Councilor Carpenter, what's your pleasure
I'll suspend the time limits.
for today only? All right. Seconder, Councilor Van Tilburg, any discussion? Seeing none? Let's take the vote.
yes.
Yep.
No,
Other than those that relate to speakers of the committee? Right.
sorry. Could we have clarity on that? I thought I heard something I didn't hear, perhaps.
So I'm interpreting it to that the suspension of time limits would apply to those who are presenting or delegating to the committee, not to ourselves and our speaking opportunities.
Just on this item,
Correct.
on this speaker.
Well, both.
Okay.
Any other questions, discussion?
The motion to waive the rules for section 15.12.5 A through D carries on a recorded vote of 6-0. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sokoli, Sless, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg.
Thank you, committee members. I'll make today a little easier. So go ahead, Councilor Curry.
Thank you. That virtually guarantees that we'll get through this quickly now. So there was also discussion about fencing. And I think the original plan was for 5 feet, if I'm not mistaken, but you're willing to go higher, right?
Yes, we are.
And to a type of fencing that would be satisfactory to the planning department, which might be more of a commercial look that Councillor Carpenter often recommends, rather than the stick and rail fence that generally tends to get knocked over by the first car. So you're good with that too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, folks.
But Councilor Van Tilburg.
That's a pretty impressive infill. Now you're asking for a height increase on both buildings. And you've managed to do that and meet all the parking requirements without asking for any adjustments. Have I heard that correctly?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
And you've not asked the city to create any separate city property lands for commercial parking or anything like that? It's all on your own land.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you. That's very impressive.
Councilor Sluss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome, folks. The current tenants, do they have an option on the first right of refusal on the 4 new units that are being created commercially?
No, they don't, not at this point. We are
So-
in active discussions with those tenants, and that I think is probably a separate issue aside from the planning application.
Okay, well, my concern was the project does displace a number of existing and some of the long-term tenants that were there. And I just wondered if there was any accommodation to those folks that are being displaced. And I think I heard you say no. Is that correct?
So at this point, there have been no discussions about relocating into the new place. There have been no discussions at this point. It's far too early to get into any discussions with any tenants for the new builds. So we're happy to engage on that, but all of those existing tenants are, under standard agreements that, as I've mentioned previously, that both the landlord and tenant have to abide by. So, at some point, those agreements, are what govern the course forward and not the planning application.
Right. Okay. I think you indicated that the timeline for construction would be dictated by the commitments made in those leases to the existing folks. Are you at liberty to share the longest timeline that would be committed to any of those tenants? Are there like 5-year leases, 7-year leases, or are they all fairly short in duration that's left?
There's all varying, Councilor Sluss, there's all varying terms. And so with those tenants that do have beyond 2 or 3 years from now, those are the tenants that we are going to have active discussions with about, how they would like to proceed. And
Okay, thank you.
it's a business arrangement that needs to happen on going forward.
Yep.
And they certainly have the ability to work within their current contracts.
Right. Okay, thank you. And secondly, and lastly, the parking structure, how many stories is that?
Through the chair, it's 1 story.
It's just 1 story?
Through the chair, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, thanks very much. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Looks like that's it for questions, Brandon, Mike, but I did want to say that I've seen a lot of applications. Especially appreciated the clarity of your application, showing the setbacks through the way you've used diagrams. I wish more planners would do that. It really illustrated in a descriptive way what it is you're asking for. And so I commend you on that. So you'll have an opportunity at the end of the hearing for responding to any questions or concerns that come up through staff or members of the public. But thank you for making your presentation. So we're now going to move to the portion of the hearing where city staff comment on the application. And Tash, I think you're going to be doing that for the planning department. So go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and councillors. My name is Tasha Adair. I'm an intermediate development planner with the city, and I will be presenting the zoning bylaw amendment for 310-320 North Park Street. All right. So the amendment, as previously mentioned, will facilitate the construction of 1 9-story mixed-use building and 1 16-story mixed-use building. Site-specific provisions are required in order to permit the use, the maximum height, rear yard, interior side yard, and loading. So this has all gone through already in the previous slide. It is on the western portion of North Park Street, north of Fairview Drive, approximate area of 12,271 square meters, and currently occupied by a commercial plaza. So this is the site plan on screen here. It will facilitate, as previously mentioned, 282 residential units, 4 ground level commercial units, and a 1-story parking structure. The lands are designated residential under the official plan, and the application was evaluated with respect to the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the official plan, in which staff have determined that the development does conform. So the site is currently zoned C10. They're seeking site-specific provisions to the C10 zone, not a zone change itself. A neighborhood meeting was held on December 7th of 2023 in consultation with ward councillors. 1 public comment has been received to date on May 13th, just a couple of days prior, with comments regarding the proposed building height and the shadowing. Oh, geez. Sorry about that. Yes, so on screen here is a couple of renderings provided in the architectural set, as well as the site-specific provisions that are required, which will be gone through in more detail on the next slide. So the C10 zone does permit mixed-use buildings in accordance with subsection 9.10.2.7, which indicates that any lot of this zone must be in accordance with Schedule M. As previously mentioned, the subject site is not within Schedule M, and therefore an amendment is required to permit the mixed use on this site. Maximum building height of 6 stories is permitted under the C10 zone, whereas the development requires a maximum height of 9 stories for building 2 and 16 stories for building 1. Further, a minimum rear yard of 7.5 meters abutting a residential zone is required, whereas the development provides 6.3 meters for building 2 and 3.3 meters for the parking structure at the rear of the site. A minimum interior side yard of 7.5 meters is required abutting a residential zone, whereas the proposed development provides 6 meters for building 2. And then lastly, for loading spaces, under the current bylaw, the minimum loading spaces provided for mixed-use buildings must be in accordance with Table 6.2. Table 6.2 requires that 1 space be provided for developments with a GFA over 300 square meters and up to 1850 square meters, whereas 0 are proposed. So to conclude, the amendment application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the official plan. It is considered compatible with the surrounding land uses and will assist in meeting the future needs of the residents of the city. And that would conclude my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tash. We'll see if there are any questions. Councillor Carpenter.
Just a quick one, great presentation, but the planner for the applicant did such a tremendous job of the application. They covered everything that you covered, but it's still a fine presentation. I'm just wondering, on the fence heights, it was more a request if we could check with our building department and get that our limit changed to a reasonable number, like 8 feet instead of 7.2. I know the 7.2, it's always bothered me. It came from the 6-foot fence, and then the 2x4, and then the lattice, and that's where the 7.2 actually comes from. Because as if everybody's building the same kind of fence, and 8 foot makes more sense for privacy and for something clearly, especially on commercial side. So just want to request that. The rest has all been covered, but the ward councils, I think, done a great job here. Thanks.
Tasha, I got a couple of questions for you. It has to do with the height of the building. So in the presentation by the applicant, we were told that it does comply with the official plan, but not the current zoning, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Right. So how high are, under the official plan, how high is the allowable height in the official plan?
So through the chair, the residential designation under the official plan permits high-rise residential buildings greater than 6 stories.
Right. So it doesn't put a maximum on it.
It does not.
All right. And so how do you suggest we deal with that issue, which is we got something that is not permitted by the current zoning, but we're asking for a height greater than that, and the official plan doesn't seem to give us any specific guidelines. So what criteria should we consider when determining the height of a proposal where it exceeds the current zoning? What are the relevant criteria in our decision making?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part?
Okay. So we're being asked to make a decision that allows height of the building that's greater than that permitted by the zoning bylaw current. But it appears the official plan gives us the discretion to do that. Right? So what I'm asking is, as a planner, either yourself or someone else, the planning department, what are the criteria we should consider when making that decision to increase the height beyond the current zoning?
So through the chair, we do still need to consider the height permissions of the current zoning bylaw as well as the new draft zoning bylaw. Additionally, the application is reviewed with respect to the site plan manual and the urban design guidelines.
Okay. Yes, Joe. Joe Muto.
Joe Muto, acting chief planner. Mayor, what we would rely on is all the technical data that's provided through the submission of this application, and if approved, the future site plan application process, which would further refine it as per any changes identified from or between the zoning and site plan control application. So really relying on the technical data I think Ms. Keys had already alluded to the sun shadow study that was provided. So a lot of those things in terms of overlook privacy matters are all looked at through those technical studies in the preparation of our recommendation to Planning Committee today.
And just for clarity, what does the proposed zoning bylaw provide?
So through the chair, the new draft zoning bylaw zones the property as NC neighborhood commercial. Under that zone, a maximum height of 14 meters.
14 stories or 14 meters?
Through the chair, 14 meters.
All right. I think that's it in terms of questions. Thank you very much, Tasha. So we're now reaching that stage of the public hearing where you seek input from members of the public. And so the floor is now open to, if there's any member of the public present that would like to speak to this application, either in support of it or against it, now is your chance. So if you're a member of the public would like to do that, please come forward. So just come forward and to the delegates table, and we'll turn the microphone on for you. And so if you'd start off, please, by stating your name and your address. So you're gonna have to push the button there.
This one?
There we go.
Okay. Hi, my name, Mr. Mayor and fellow councilors, my name is Craig LaRock. I'm an owner and resident at 36 Hayhurst Road, unit 330, which directly faces this new development that's being proposed.
So Craig, how do we spell your surname?
LAROCQUE.
Great. Thanks very much. Go ahead.
I'll apologize, I've never done this before, but some of the questions and concerns I've had since receiving the initial flyer, I've been in communication with the developer and also Mr. McQuarrie, our counselor, about our concerns. We both agree that that site needs development, but we don't agree that we need 16 stories. My personal feeling is, and what some others have shared, is that if you went with 2 9-story buildings, the appearance would be reasonable for us to be looking at. One of the things I did ask at the open house meeting was a rendering. What is it going to look like from our perspective? We've had the front perspective, but we don't know what we're going to look like from our perspective. And that being said, being a wooden fence, which we had asked to increase at least over 8 feet, our only concern with that being a wood fence is maintenance of that fence, control of graffiti, and the fact that many times the fences at that Shoppers Plaza have been burned down by the students coming from North Park Street. The biggest thing I feel is we're a 40-plus-year-old building, one of the first and early purpose-built condominium buildings. And therefore, we are in a maintenance schedule always, as any building does. The idea that the groundwater that we know is only somewhere, I think, between 3 and 8 meters below the surface of our ground surface. So I have a concern of the fact that they can't dig a foundation to support this size of a building, that pilings or high core drilling is going to have to be done down to bedrock, which will expose the water table, possibly causing flooding to our garage. And the communication and the understanding that the 1-story parking garage that is going to be put in along our property line, the plaza and the current property will be graded from North Park Street to our property line, which will take their ground level to our foundation level of our parking garage. This would expose our exterior wall, possibly causing damage, flooding. So something would have to be put in place, like some sort of strain gauges, especially if they're going to drive pilings in that could affect our conditions. Our current board is working with our engineers on maintenance of our garage. They've put a long-term plan in place for hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next few years to do repairs. If the building or construction causes acceleration on our thing, which would cause us to spend more money quickly, we wouldn't have the funding to do so. And as a resident, this may impact us through a special assessment, which most of us don't want to afford. They've answered the question of the car washes. That's what I brought up at that meeting. For the fact that our parking lot would probably need to be cleaned, cars would have to be cared for. One of the biggest thing is that we have many residents on that backside of the building that have patios and balconies that like to enjoy their summers outside. So therefore, a working schedule not to have truck traffic or construction noise starting before 8 o'clock in the morning, have everything wrapped up and quieted down by 5 o'clock at night. Short of that, I don't recall anything else. It's, I guess it's basically vibration from the construction and any effects that it may have on our existing older building. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. LaRocque, and I'll tell you, I've been keeping a note of all your questions, and we'll make sure that those are raised with the applicant when they have their right to respond at the end of this. So, committee members, do you have any questions? We'll go to Councillor McCurry, then Councillor Carpenter.
Thanks for coming, Craig, and folks that came with you today. So I heard your comment about the building heights, and I thought that was quite interesting. So we have a total of, help me out here, we've got 16 plus 9. Is that the total number of stories? So were you suggesting that the two buildings just settled in at the same height, lower than 16, higher than 9?
If both buildings were at 9 stories, I kind of guess that if you, because they're doing an internal parking structure, if they don't go 6 stories, 16 stories, they may be able to remove one level of parking structure from that building and still have a number of condominium units within that area. It's also more visual to what is existing in our area, especially on the east side of North Park Street, the apartment buildings there, which I believe are anywhere between 8, 10 or 12 stories.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Carpenter.
Currently, Hayers Village, those residents that back onto it, that have balconies, what they're looking at is a gravel roof. If I understand it, that 320 North Park Street sits down almost 6 feet from your parking lot. So they currently look at a gravel roof of both the plaza to the south end and the plaza that currently exists on this property.
Correct, and the parking lot.
Yeah, so would the visual of seeing an apartment building not be better than looking at a rooftop?
I agree with, but it's the overall abundance of height just on the one building.
So looking up at 9 stories, still gonna be higher than your building, so, but higher than that would just not look right?
Correct.
Okay. And the other issues are technical issues that sort of the applicant will have to deal with. Thank you.
Mr. LaRocque, I got a couple of questions for you. So are you on the condo board?
No, sir, I am the superintendent of the building.
And and Hayhurst is a condominium,
Yes.
all right? And has the board considered this issue? The impact this development will have on the condominium?
Yes, they have. It's been discussed at a board level, and I thought that the board did submit an email in regards to their thoughts on it.
Okay. And I understand your concern about the height. We have one building, 16 stories, one at 9. That's a total of 25 stories. You're suggesting 9 and 9, which would be 18. So I guess your concern is not so much one building higher than the other, but the fact that we have either or building being fairly high.
Correct.
Okay. So how would you feel about two buildings that are, say, 11 or 12 stories high?
To me, I wouldn't really have an objection to that. I believe the one on the corner of Fairview and North Park is 12 stories.
12 stories, yeah. Because there are a couple of very tall buildings in the neighborhood. Well, at least 12 or 13 stories.
Yeah, the one on north corner, of North Park Street, and I believe the one over on Memorial Drive, which isn't in our visual.
I think what the proponent will tell us is that having two buildings of different height is more visually appealing than two buildings the same height.
Don't have an opinion on that.
And I think the other concern would be to the north, there is a housing development, which are primarily townhouses. Right,
To the north side is the Northland Gardens, the city housing, yes.
right, they're primarily townhouses.
Yeah.
And that the idea, I think, was the building that is adjacent to that property be lower or kept low in comparison to the other building. Does that seem to make any sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. LaRock, and you've raised some really good questions, which we'll make sure we raise with the applicant when they have their chance to respond. And we will then deal with the application immediately after the public hearing is closed. So
Thank you
please
very
feel
much.
free to stay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. So is there any other member of the public present in the room today that would like to speak to this matter, either in support of it or in opposition? Now's your chance to come forward. I'll ask, Lisa, do we have anybody that registered virtually?
Through the chair, I have no virtual registrants, and I'm seeing no raised hands.
Okay. And have we received any emails with written comment?
Through the chair, I have not, and I have just confirmed with the planner on file that she's not received any comments either.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for a third and final time. The rules require I do this. For a third and final time, if there's any member of the public that is present today that would like to speak to this application, either in support of it or in opposition to it, or in commenting on it, now is your last chance to come forward. Okay, so I'm going to ask the applicant if you'd like to come forward, please. And I think you'll probably want to respond certainly to some of the questions raised by Mr. LaRock. And if you weren't keeping track of his questions, I did.
Thank you, Mayor. To the chair, I just wanted to talk about the height. Let's deal with the height first. So from a height perspective, from the architect's perspective, and when we were looking at the design of this property, we were very cognizant of the separation distance for the residents to the west versus the building. So we wanted to make sure that actually the original design we were looking at were more along North Park Street, creating more of a wall there. So we purposefully created two separate towers, and the one to the south being taller because it was next to the commercial development to the south, but also from the perspective of the separation distance between the developments. So if you look at the location of where the tower starts and the back of the units at Hayhurst, so their balconies, you're looking at close to 300 feet separation distance. So that's a significant distance from where they are and what they would perceive as the building. We wanted to make sure that, as Mr. Muto was saying, that we met the angular plane, and the angular plane deals with the 45-degree angle from the back of the property to the top of the building. We more than meet that. So that often deals with shadows as well as views. So those residents, first of all, from a privacy perspective, the number of units that are actually
Can you
looking.
explain that 45-degree thing?
So the 45-degree angular plane is from the back property line to the top of the building. So if you can imagine that. So here's the back of the property. This is our tall building. What we're looking at is to ensure it's a rule of thumb that planners, architects hate, planners like to talk about. And that is, if you meet that angular plane, so you don't go through it, then the separation distance is appropriate from the perspective of the distance that's created ensures privacy for those people that are back here because of the distance that's created. It also deals with shadows, so you don't have negative shadow impacts. That's the importance of that angular plane.
You want to keep it 45 or lower?
45 or lower, or around 40 and 50 is what we're often looking at. It's not a requirement. It's a guideline. So sometimes you can exceed it, sometimes you're under it. But the big thing in this case is we far exceeded, but it's more the separation distance. And the fact that those units that are actually facing the residents at Hayhurst are very limited. So you don't have the principal building, so you don't have like 35 units that are looking behind. You have a limited number of units at the back wall of the building that would be looking in behind. So that from a privacy perspective, you don't have you don't have 75 balconies on each level that are looking at the back. So from a privacy perspective, we've taken that into consideration by creating narrower buildings, and the longer part is in areas that aren't affecting the neighbors. And once again, we can't forget that we are backing onto its parking lot to parking lot. So when we go to the next issue in my mind, which is the parking structure, we recognize the concerns of the condo corporation. We recognize their concerns from a fencing perspective and the maintenance of that fence. What needs to be considered as well is this will be a condo corporation, just like they are. So they will be interested in maintaining their property in a similar fashion to Hayhurst. So I've spoken to Mr. Leschuk, and he is willing to consider a vinyl fence if a wood fence isn't what would be of interest to them. That is definitely something that we can address through the site plan approval process and through future discussions with them. With respect to the underground parking, the parking structure, as well as the ability to construct our building from a foundation perspective. We respect the condo corporation's concerns regarding the location of groundwater. We have undertaken our own hydrogeological studies to confirm that we can in fact construct our foundation where we're proposing to construct them. So that isn't a concern, and it will also be dealt with in greater detail through the site plan approval process. So the city will have the opportunity to review those documents in detail and confirm and be satisfied themselves that from a construction and building code perspective, we can in fact do this. With respect to the proximity of their underground parking structure, we too have concerns, and through the site plan approval process, we can definitely deal with that appropriately. Again, the city will be looking at detailed construction drawings to ensure that the foundations are appropriately located. When it comes to vibration, again, something that is very common to be dealt with through the site plan approval process, we would want to ensure that the state of or the condition of their underground parking structure is not negatively impacted by our proposed development, and whether that is through existing. Often what happens is you would go in and take before pictures. So ensure you would look at the underground parking structure, go in, take pictures, obviously at the agreement of the condo corporation, and ensure that during construction, we look at what happens afterwards and ensure there aren't any negative impacts, which is just what the condo representative was speaking of. So we are definitely prepared to look at that and reach appropriate agreements through the site plan approval process. And I think I've dealt with all of them, but I may have missed some. So I would respectfully request if I've missed any, Mayor Davis, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Dust. Dust from construction.
Dust, yes. From a dust perspective, I'll let the owner, Mr. Leschuk, respond to that.
Unfortunately, dust is a natural byproduct of construction, and we follow all the normal dust mitigation procedures that are required. We operate under all of the necessary requirements under the building code in order to comply with that. Above and beyond that, what we've already agreed to is we would definitely proceed with a solid hoarding around the construction site, which would really help with mitigating dust transmission. And again, when we're talking about dust, please keep in mind, this is regarding just the site work. And that's for a relatively short period of time. We're talking 2 to 4 months of site work. And beyond that, we then start dealing with the building construction itself, and the amount of dust generated from that activity is significantly less. It's really the site work and any excavation that goes on that generates dust when there is some. So we follow standard construction procedures, and it is an unfortunate byproduct. We have agreed to definitely providing car washes and sweeping of the neighboring parking lot.
Okay, any questions? We'll go Councillor Carpenter, then Councillor McCreary.
Just a quick question. Sorry, you kept mentioning the condo board. Did you get a letter from the condo board themselves?
Through the chair, no, we did not.
Okay, so when you were mentioning the condo board, you're really talking about a resident of the condo corporation.
Through the chair, that's correct.
But I didn't hear at any time that he said he was representing the board.
My apologies. I thought he was. That was my
Oh,
misconception.
yeah, okay, because I think he'd have to have authority from the board to represent the board, who represents, is elected by the condo corporation members. Okay, so you haven't had, but you will have some conversation with the condo board about any of their concerns, how to, like, so that you could set up communications protocol, how to deal with issues as they rise?
Through the chair, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor McCreary.
I would ask committee to believe that I believe Mr. LaRocque's views represent the views of pretty much everybody that lives in that building. Although he may not have a name tag that says boss on his shirt. He's representative, and so if we could just accept that. Mr. Leschuk, you heard a comment about height, building height, and I want to ask you to answer this today, but perhaps you might want to give some consideration to make it one building slightly lower, the other building slightly higher. I'll leave that with you because you'll either get approval or not get approval based on what's before us today. Let me ask you about your groundwater experience down the street at, I don't know what number was the other one on Fairview.
34 Norman?
Yeah, sorry, 34 Norman. Was your groundwater experience horrendous there?
No, groundwater was quite deep in that location.
Okay, because I remember when we did Gretzky Center, we dig a hole and it would fill up with water, and that one's quite close. So as long as your geotechnical folks are on that, I don't think there'll be any problem. And so you guys are committing to doing a pre-construction inventory of the foundation and the parkade in there. So what I heard earlier.
So through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We are going to do a pre-construction inventory with pictures and document the pre-existing conditions and post conditions.
Yeah,
That's correct.
and I think in memory, I think they did some significant work to the parkade not too many years ago. You can shake your head no if I'm wrong back there. So it's probably in pretty good shape right now, and I can appreciate why they'd have some concerns about that. But thank you for coming back up.
Or just one more quick answer regarding the groundwater issue. One of the reasons that we are not going underground in this particular building is to avoid any groundwater issues. The groundwater is below any foundation depth. However, we didn't want to deal with any ongoing waterproofing or anything that might be required for a parking structure. So that's why you see the building proposal design the way it is.
So I have a couple of questions about the building height issue. So your proposal is beyond the parking garage, including the parking garage, 25 stories in total, right? 16 and 9? 16 in one building, 9 in the other? Right. So why wouldn't you consider doing 2 12-story buildings, or one at 12 and one at 13?
Through the chair, part of that has to do with, as you had mentioned as well, variety in the streetscape. It looks better to have different heights for buildings. But also, we wanted to keep the height of the building to the north lower than the one to the south because of its impact on the development to the north. So the higher that building is, the greater the shadow impacts. So we want to keep that one at 9 stories and allow the taller building to the south, which wouldn't have the same impacts because of the way the sun is situated.
So what goes in your decision making? You've got one building at 9, I understand that, but what goes into the decision making on whether the second one should be 14, 15, 19, 22? Like, how do you make that decision as a builder or developer?
Through the chair, part of that is economics, and I'll let Mr. Leschuk deal with that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the answer is a complicated answer, but it has to do with all of the things. It's surrounding neighborhood. It is economics of the project, and also parking, which we have talked about previously. All of those things have to fit into putting together this puzzle that results in an economically viable project. So parking is a big consideration in how we develop a site, and the constraints start with that piece of the puzzle, as well as what Brenda had already talked about regarding neighboring properties and being cognizant of the 45-degree and infringement into those areas in terms of shadows and so on. So that's why you see the design, other than for architectural reasons, that's why you see the design being the way it is, the 9-story and the 16-story on the other.
I had one developer comment to me that the increase in interest rates means their building has to be higher. Is that a relevant consideration, the interest rates?
It's a loaded question.
That's what I usually do. I ask loaded questions.
We have to comply with the zoning bylaw and build within the site constraints. So in order to make things economically viable, developers are looking at different ways of, trying to achieve a sufficient margin to be able to build these days. It is a very difficult proposition,
Right. And
other than just interest rates, all of it.
interest rates don't help though. No, okay. I'm not seeing any other questions, so thank you very much, Brenda and Mike. That was very helpful. So that concludes the public hearing portion of this particular application. So the committee is now going to make a decision on it. And I'm going to ask, is there a member of the committee? Ask Councillor Carpenter, you'd like to put the proposed amendment of the proposed resolution on the floor that's recommended to us by staff, which essentially is that we approve the application, perhaps. Lisa, if you could put that up, share that, please. So Councillor Carpenter, you're moving it. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Sakoli. We'll just share. There's the wording of the resolution, which essentially is approving the application as it has been presented to us. So floor is open for discussion. Councillor Carpenter.
Well, we know the city is changing and development is changing. I'm very pleased this is a local developer that's built in the community before and built quality product, Fairview Drive, Norman Street, and the plaza in the 4th Ward on Linden Road. I don't see any validity to the argument that 16 stories is harmful to you when you're 300 feet away and you're looking at a 9-story building. It's still higher than the 3-story building that is concerned about 16 stories. I mean, so I guess I don't see that argument. I do see the argument about keeping it lower at the 9 stories where it's next to 2-story townhouses. That makes a lot of sense. And having the different heights does provide for architectural significance in the community. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think this is really a very well-designed, well-thought-out building. They're talking about putting fencing all around their property. I noticed that Hayhurst Village has not had any fencing around their property. I know it's a very old condominium. It's one of the first ones built in the city, but there's been no fencing around that property in its entirety. And it's a parking lot. So you're talking about a parking lot on a parking lot. So moving this development to the front of North Park Street makes a lot of sense. Puts it farther away from certainly puts it farther away from Hayhurst Village. And so I don't see any concerns here. I think this is a good development, a good design. And I think it's a local builder, so we know it's actually going to happen, which is a good thing as well. And it's going to be a condominium corporation, and one condominium corporation, which I think is really good. And they're going to be able to, condominium corporations, as Hayhurst Village knows, are responsible for maintaining their property as per the current condominium legislation. And so this probably will be kept up in its entirety. It certainly beats having truck lessons around the back on the parking lot and all kinds of other different avenues that were back there that were causing lots of difficulty in the past. This will be a community that will actually, I think, accent the whole neighborhood and provide increased value for everybody, including Hayhurst Village, quite frankly. And now that it is an old, I think Hayhurst Village was our first ever stacked condos ever in the city of Brantford. And now that seems to be the norm going forward. So I'm very much in support of this.
Councillor Van Tilburg.
I actually just want to thank the presenters. It's been a long time since I've heard a very precise, crisp, detailed, thorough accounting for the projects. So often I'm looking at vague projects that are left open, that they just want to get things to a certain point, and it seems like it's for flipping purposes or for speculation further on. And when I hear something detailed, and quite frankly, your presenter had a lot of enthusiasm in their project. I mean, that shows through. And that means something to me. It has an impact. It almost feels like I care about what I'm doing and who I'm doing it for. When that happens, I believe everyone wins. I've seen a desire for cooperation. One of the things that I would like to see, if possible, I believe it was asked by one of the condo, I don't, representative, I guess, if Councilor McCreary wishes to put it in that context, was for a artistic visual on what it would look like from their side. And if they've asked for that, I think if we can get the visuals of the other angles, we should be able to get the visual from this angle. And I'd like to see that done. But yeah, there's no extra asks in here. It's following all the rules. I'm pretty happy with this.
So I mean, you're going to vote for it? Councillor McCreary.
My initial thought when I learned of the development was, woo-hoo. I won't have to make any more trips there to deal with that trucking company, to deal with the driver education center, to deal with the cans full of crap that you guys have to look at day after day after day. And I must say, on balance, I'm supportive of this. I'm going to be supporting it today. Like you, I don't like the height. I don't like the height anywhere. We approved a bunch of buildings here that are, you know, we've got more coming that are 20 stories down in South Brantford. We've got a bunch that'll be coming to us on Charing Cross that are probably going to be comparable to this. And we really don't have a whole lot of choice in this because, quite frankly, if we don't approve it, somebody else will. So that's my only hesitation. On the plus side, as I said, you're going to be rid of a bad neighbor, 2 bad neighbors, 3 bad neighbors, maybe. You're going to put up with some construction noise and debris and annoyance for a couple of years. And again, that's not something any of us have any sort of control over. But I think we've learned that these folks are pretty good and they're good to their word. And thinking back to what they did on Norman or Fairview or whatever it's addressed as, that project went very well. It's first rate. And I think they're pretty good neighbors to the people around them. So I don't see anything bad in that respect either. We've heard, when we were at the meeting, we heard from the developer at the meeting that they were quite willing to look after any of the special conditions that the condominium owners wanted to impose upon them, you know, things like car washing, which quite frankly, good for you guys. I've never seen a developer agree to that before. And sweeping, they generally do it on their own property, but not on neighboring properties. And the fence is going to be a big deal as well, because that'll separate, to some extent, separate the 2 properties visually. So I think other than the height, it's a win-win-win-win-win situation. We've also heard today that they're going to be doing a pre-construction inventory of your premises to make sure that if anything gets damaged, you can either deal with them by way of securities that may be in place during and shortly after construction period, or you can sue them later. But I think what you're looking at is a reasonable developer, good citizens, and they're going to make sure your interests are well looked after, other than having to look at a big building beside you. Again, the way of the world, and welcome finally to Brantford to have these development issues around people wanting to invest and build here. So I'll be supportive, and I'm hoping that I won't have to be called to the site to deal with any issues. Thank you.
Councillor Sluss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to support this. From my perspective, it's a first-class project that's being proposed here, and I think it's backed up by existing projects that have been done by a local company. And I think, again, that speaks volumes and certainly gives a comfort level that I appreciate. Typically on an infill, the infill kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, and you can tell right away that it was shoehorned into an area that it probably shouldn't have ended up being in. But the supports the way they are, I guess, with the OLT and whatnot, things get passed that perhaps shouldn't. But in this case, in my opinion, this is something that once it's built and once it's in the air and the construction era of it is over, you'll have something that exists there that looked like it always existed there. And I think that speaks volumes to the preparation and the planning that goes into putting it in the first place. So while I understand that nobody likes change, and I get why the folks at Hayhurst are raising concerns that they're raising, but I think that's human nature. I think I wouldn't say they're unfounded, but I would say that they will be dealt with during the process. And I think once we have a completed project, I think they will come to understand that really maybe their concerns weren't as drastic as what they thought. So having said all of that, I'm pleased to support it, and I look forward to the project getting into the ground. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, not seeing any other comments, I'll call the vote.
Item 4.1 carries unanimously on a recorded vote of 6-0. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sakoli, Sless, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg.
All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break before we start the next application, which is the application on Erie Ave. So we'll be back at about 10:55. So we're now reconvening the May Planning Committee meeting, and we're now going to move into the second item, which is another statutory hearing. And this concerns zoning bylaw amendment PZ 1623 relating to a property at 7579 Erie Avenue here in Brantford. So now I'll call upon the applicant or the agent to come forward to speak to this application. So as you know, the procedure is that we ask that you identify yourself, state your name and address, and if you're the owner applicant or agent, to also clarify that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Chang, and I'm an intermediate planner with NPG, here on behalf of the applicant, Ina Hansen, who's here with me today. I also have with me today Aaron Butler, principal planner of NPG, and online we have our heritage planner, Mark Gladys, with us virtually, who's here to answer any heritage-related questions that you may have. Next slide, please. The application is for 75 and 79 Erie Avenue. Both properties combined have an area of approximately 0.1 hectares. There's currently an existing two-story building on the property at 75 Erie, and the lot at 79 Erie is currently vacant. The property is currently zoned CA19 General Commercial and is designated in the official plan as being within the intensification corridor. Next slide, please. This slide shows some context of the property within the surrounding neighborhood. As you can see on the screen there, the property is located in a neighborhood with mixed uses. To the north and south in red are commercial uses, and to the east and west are residential uses in yellow. The property is also in proximity to downtown Brantford, with an existing transit line on Ontario Street and a bicycle route on Erie Avenue. Next slide, please. We looked at what the city's official plan and urban design manual says about this property in order to understand the development intent of the property in the neighborhood. This provides direction to guide development throughout the city. And as I mentioned before, the official plan designates the property as being within the city's intensification corridor. So that's the strip of orange there. You can see on the screen, that's Erie Avenue. This designation is part of the city's strategic growth area and is intended to accommodate higher density mixed-use development to support an integrated transit system. And specifically, the official plan policies speak to creating pedestrian and transit-oriented development through residential intensification and a high quality of urban design. The official plan policies specifically permits mixed-use mid-rise buildings in this designation. And specifically along Erie Avenue, it permits a height of up to 6 stories. In the city's urban design manual, the intersection of Erie and Eagle Avenue is designated as mixed-use building node, which is the first priority area for development of mid to high-rise mixed-use buildings. So given this existing neighborhood context and policy context, it creates an intent of the neighborhood as an area for a focus for residential intensification and redevelopment. Next slide, please. We're proposing a zoning bylaw amendment application to facilitate a 6-story mixed-use building, which is intended to be rental, with ground floor commercial uses and 20 residential units at grade. The building will have 18 parking spaces on site with 1 accessible space and 3 on-street commercial spaces along Eagle Avenue. The driveway access will be from Erie Avenue and exit onto Eagle Avenue. And as you can see on the screen there, a portion of the property will be conveyed to the city, which is outlined in yellow. We've been working closely with staff through this process to address their comments on parking and streetscaping. We relocated the parking on-street commercial parking from Erie to Eagle Avenue, Relocating the parking would avoid the removal of trees on Erie Avenue while allowing for enhanced streetscaping along the Erie Avenue frontage. While detailed landscaping will be provided at the site plan stage, this is a solution that we've been working with staff on, which allows us to appropriately address both the reduced parking rate and the landscaping coverage. Next slide, please. These are some renderings showing the potential development. And as you can see, the commercial entrance is located at the corner, which is a prime location in order to address the intersection of Erie and Eagle. The building uses brick and architectural detailing in order to ensure compatibility with the buildings to the north. And the use of glazing and windows on the upper stories helps to mitigate the massing of the building. Parking, as you can see, is also covered and screened from the street. Next slide, please. We're proposing a zoning bylaw amendment application with site-specific provisions for minimum landscaped open space, parking, and minimum interior side yard. And I should note that this is a modification within the current zone. Next slide, please. With regards to the landscaped open space, we're requesting this reduction because the property is very constrained. Through the allocation of the road winding to the city, this impacts the ability to provide landscaping on site. And we anticipate that the area of the property that has been allocated to the city would be used for landscaping. And as mentioned before, through discussions with staff and as shown in the site plan, we're providing for enhanced streetscaping on the Erie Avenue frontage as well. We're also requesting a reduced parking rate for the residential component, which is an overall reduction of 2 parking spaces for the residential. Again, recognizing the constrained nature of the site, the proximity to the downtown, the access to both cycling routes and transit, as well as conversations with the city's transportation staff, we considered that this reduction would be appropriate for the development. And lastly, we're requesting a decrease of the interior side yard at the ground floor. Again, due to the lot size and the developable area as a result of the road widening, there isn't an opportunity to accommodate the 5.5 meter setback. However, parking is screened on the ground floor, and we're proposing a 3 meter setback on the upper floors in order to maintain privacy and provide the adjacent property with additional buffering. Next slide, please. The supporting studies that were submitted with this application include the planning justification report, the urban design brief, the architectural plans and the shadow study, the engineering report and plans, the heritage impact assessment, the noise study, and the geotechnical report. Next slide, please. Through the zoning process, we've received comments related to heritage, building tenure, and more, and have received a number of comments in support of the application. We'd like to spend some time just addressing these comments here. Regarding the recommendations of the Heritage Committee, the vibration study and building coverage are items that can be addressed at the site plan stage. Regarding the recommendation on retention of existing features, our heritage expert, who's here today to answer any questions that you may have, concluded in the heritage impact assessment that there aren't any historical features in the building that should be retained. However, the applicant is open to exploring some type of commemoration of the building's historic use. We also received questions on the building tenure, and at this stage, the building is intended to be rental. And lastly, we received comments related to construction, timeline for construction, fencing, and future commercial use, and want to note that this will be dealt with the site plan and building permit stage, which is after the zoning. Next slide, please. I also wanted to touch on the holding symbol, which staff are proposing for the on-street parking and streetscaping, as well as the functional servicing report. We've reviewed these comments from staff and are working with staff to address them and hope to address these items before the bylaw is passed. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It conforms with the growth plan and the City of Brantford official plan. It contributes to intensification in a range of housing options in the neighborhood, provides an opportunity to make efficient use of land and existing services and infrastructure by directing growth to an area designated for residential use and redevelopment. And lastly, it is compact, transit supportive, and is a well-designed built form with the surrounding uses from an urban design and land use compatibility perspective. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Your chance, so we'll look at, for questions, Councillor Van Tilburg.
Could you highlight, where does this encroach on the city land?
I can answer that through the mayor. It's through the site plan process, there will be road allowance widening that's taken and a daylight triangle. So the development, the building itself isn't encroaching on city land, but it's going to be pushed away from the road allowance.
So the front of the building at the corner isn't on, won't be on city land or in that daylight triangle?
Through the mayor, no.
All right. And the 3 parking spots, the commercial parking spots, those are city spots, are they not?
Through the mayor, so for our original application, we proposed a residential parking ratio of 0.75 parking spaces per unit. So that would be 15 parking spaces on site for residential.
What do you require? Is it 1?
and 3
1 to 1 like the
1.
previous development?
Right, and 3 for the commercial use. And through the review of the application, with city staff and through transportation staff comments, it was suggested that instead, I should say, we were also proposing 3 to add 3 parking spaces within the road allowance on street parking. And it was suggested instead through transportation staff that all of the parking on site, all 18, be for the residential use, and that those 3 on street be used for the commercial use.
But those are city spots,
Those would be on, yes,
so they're not
Correct.
yours.
those would be within the city's, on street
Okay.
parking.
I just want to make sure I'm separating what the numbers really are here. Thank you.
Councillor Slass.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How many bedrooms are these units proposed to be?
Through the mayor, they're currently designed as 2-bedroom units. The designs early, they could be smaller. The units themselves could be smaller as well. But preliminary, the architectural plans are 2-bedroom units.
Okay, because in the comments, the Grand Erie or the school boards didn't comment, but I think you're a long way from a school there, are you not?
And your question just relating to the appropriateness of the building for
Well, I'm just wondering if the building would, it would be, I think, feasible to assume that there would be children as well living in the building. And I'm just wondering, since there was, I don't understand why the school boards had not commented on the project. The comments had just said no comments.
through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not positive on why the school board had no comments, but perhaps staff might be able to clarify that if
Okay.
they've had discussions directly with the school board.
Okay, all right, I'll take that up with them when it's their opportunity. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions. We heard in the previous application, the proponent told us a little bit about themselves, being a local development company. I'd like to know, is the owner of this property 1,403,721 Ontario Corp? Is that the owner?
Yes, that's right, Mr. Mayor, and our client Ina Henson here is here tonight, who's the principal of that company, along with her husband.
So where's that company based out of?
So Ina's based out of GTA, and Ina, if you want to chime in, feel free to, but out of the GTA.
So can you tell us a little bit about your history, what it is you've built in the past?
I'll take that first, Mr. Mayor. So Ina and her husband Grant have holds other rental buildings. They haven't built other rental buildings, but they hold several others. I think the biggest rental building they have is up to 6. And they're looking at getting into the building side of it and building a rental building and then holding.
And I've been told by individuals in that neighborhood that the fact the property's already been relisted for sale. Is that true?
Mr. Mayor, I can't speak to that, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I can answer that. No, it hasn't been listed for sale. That's the first that I hear about it. And to answer your previous comment as well, we haven't built anything yet. We were looking at potentially, adding some more rental units to our portfolio. What we did not want to do, which is the only thing that seems to be feasible in the current market, is buy a building and, do extensive renovations and try to remove the current tenants that are in there right now to do those renovations. So that's why we decided to pivot to build brand new rental units that we can maintain long-term. So that's why specifically we chose this property, just because of the current state that it's in.
So
But no, this building is not listed for sale.
is there any other reason why you have chosen Brantford?
Well, because we're in the area and my husband's from Norfolk, I'm from GTA, I'm originally from Ukraine. So we're kind of all over the place, and just by, driving through and looking at different cities, there seems to be a lot of opportunity in Brantford to, create new housing, create better housing than what's currently there.
Right, and do you currently have a commercial tenant in the building?
Yes, we do. Their lease was up for renewal on April 30th, or their lease was, the lease was finished on April 30th. So we're in contact with them to renew for another year. She verbally committed, but hasn't signed any paperwork yet.
Okay. Councilor McCurry.
Welcome, folks. I'd like to come back to the question that was asked about the 3 on-street parking spots. And it's quite new to me to have on-street parking included with the development proposal. So that's property that you do not own, is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay.
Our original thought was to propose 3 new spaces along Erie within the boulevard, essentially, which is the land that's being dedicated to the city for the road widening. Again, through consultation with staff, instead of proposing them on Erie, staff suggested that perhaps we could put 3 just, basically new line painting on Eagle to create some parking and enhance the streetscaping on Erie instead.
And is there a fee that you would pay for that?
Certainly the cost through the mayor, the cost of doing that would be borne by the developer.
And it would remain public parking?
That would be my understanding through you, Mr. Mayor. It would be public parking, and we'd have to have consultation with transportation staff. But the idea is that those 3 spaces would be used by the commercial use. So perhaps there'd be some time limits or things like that on it, but they would be not for the residential parking, not long-term overnight parking for residential.
So your proposal is to use municipal parking to supplement your insufficient parking?
Through the mayor, as I said earlier, our original application was for
That's not before us today. What's before us is what's before us.
I think the application we've proposed is before you tonight. Staff are recommending a different parking ratio than what we proposed. And the parking ratio that we proposed, which we believe was supportable, is 0.75 spaces per unit with the 3 commercial spaces on the property. And then the 3 that would be in the road allowances are just additional. They're additional and they'd be public parking. Staff were suggesting that, which is in the recommendation report tonight, staff are suggesting that all 18 on site be for residential, and that the 3 that would be built within the road allowance could be used for the commercial instead of having the 3 commercial on site.
And there was an earlier question about encroachment. And I'm not sure I understood either the question or the answer. So can you give a more elaborate description of what the encroachment issue is?
Through the mayor, there's no building encroachment.
How is there encroachment then if there's no building?
I won't speak for Councillor Van Tilburg, but I think he was asking about the parking.
Okay,
And so there isn't a parking encroachment per se, but there are 3 parking spaces proposed to be within the road allowance.
okay. So all you need from us then is parking. There's nothing else you need from us?
Through the mayor, so the zoning amendment tonight is for the increased height within the bylaw to 6 stories, which is in line with the official plan.
Mhm.
The parking. There is a request for reduced landscape coverage. And there's a request for reduced southerly interior side yard.
Okay, thank you.
Not seeing any other questions, but you will have an opportunity at the end of the next 2 sections to respond to any questions or concerns. So please stick around. I think you probably would anyways. So we'll move to the staff presentation. I think we have Dora, you're going to be doing the staff presentation. So floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of Planning Committee. My name is Jeff Medeiros. I'm a senior project manager with the Planning Department. I'm not here to present the staff recommendation report, but rather here to introduce my colleague Dora. She started with the city in January, and this will be her first time presenting to this committee. So I just want to welcome Dora to the city. Thank you.
Welcome, Dora, and we look forward to seeing your first presentation to us.
Thanks, Jeff, and hello, Planning Committee members. Like Jeff said, my name is Dora Propone, and I'm a development planner here at the City of Brantford. Today, I'll be presenting on the zoning bylaw amendment application for 75 and 79 Erie Avenue. The amendment would facilitate the construction of a 6-story mixed-use building. The application was deemed complete on March 15th, 2024, and has been processed within the 90-day timeframe now required by the Planning Act. The subject lands are located at the intersection of Eagle Avenue and Erie Avenue. The lands contain an existing 2-story building currently being operated for commercial use, as shown in the photo on the screen, as well as paved parking area with access to both Eagle and Erie Avenue. This is the site plan and a rendering of the proposed development. As the applicant mentioned, the proposal will consist of ground floor commercial space, 20 dwelling units, and an enclosed parking structure, as you can see in the rendering on the screen. There are 18 residential spaces proposed for the 20 residential units and 3 on-street parking spaces for the commercial space. The lands are designated intensification corridor in the city's official plan and are considered a strategic growth area. The designation permits mixed-use buildings as proposed and limits building heights on Erie Avenue to 6 stories. The site is also within Special Policy Area 1, which wouldn't permit basements or more sensitive uses. The application was evaluated with respect to the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the official plan, in which staff have determined that the proposed development conforms. The subject lands are zoned floodplain general commercial zone, exception 19 in the city zoning bylaw. And again, as the applicant discussed, the purpose of the rezoning is to establish site-specific provisions to recognize a reduction in interior side yard setback, landscape open space, and parking. Staff also recommend a holding provision be put on the application until 2 conditions are met. The first being the preparation of a streetscaping and on-street parking plan, and then the second being a revised functional servicing report that satisfies the city's requirements. Among other development considerations discussed in the report, the notable ones analyzed were parking, heritage, and public engagement. So for parking, transportation staff have determined that the reduction of 2 parking spaces is appropriate for the development, and this is based on analysis of unit size, walkability of the neighborhood, nearby transit routes, and distance from downtown. For a heritage, it is noted that a heritage impact assessment was completed for the proposed development due to its proximity to two heritage buildings, as you can see on the photo on the screen, in the photo on the screen. The mixed-use building is proposed to have design elements consistent with the nearby buildings. The development was also discussed at a Heritage Committee meeting, and as a result of that meeting, staff will require the applicant to prepare a conservation plan as part of a subsequent site plan phase. For public engagement, the application was circulated to all property owners within 120 meters of the site, and a neighborhood meeting was held on March 7th of this year. The main topics brought up at the meeting were detailed in the report, as well as the responses to those comments. It is staff's opinion that all public comments received can be addressed through the holding provision and future requirements of the site plan phase. This is our standard land calculation. So if the same number of units were built as single detached dwellings on the smallest size lot currently permitted in the city, a little over 1 more acre of land would be required. And this isn't including additional roads and infrastructure. In conclusion, this application is consistent with the PPS, with the growth plan, and the city's official plan. The proposal will facilitate the appropriate development of an underutilized site. The design will match the character of the neighborhood and will contribute to a vibrant streetscape in an intensification corridor. Thus, planning staff recommends the application PZ-16-23 be approved. Thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Very good start, Dora. So questions, Councilman McCreary.
Well done. Thank you. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked about the 3 parking spots because I really have no idea what that means. So I don't believe I've ever seen a developer make use of city property as part of their application before. Could you take us through that?
Through the chair, I'm going to defer that to our transportation project manager.
Jeff Cornwell, Project Manager, Development Transportation. Through the chair, this is a similar situation to the block of commercial and mixed-use buildings we have on Erie Ave between this site, between Eagle Ave and Clarence, where a lot of the businesses there, such as Wingmaster, they don't have any dedicated parking themselves. They are relying on parking within laybys within the city's right-of-way. So we were looking at a similar concept for this development.
Okay, I appreciate that. The other circumstances were not a new development. And I don't think I've ever seen this before. Joe, do you recall ever seeing a circumstance like this before where we're utilizing city property to meet the developer's unmet obligation?
Through the chair to Councilor McCreary, we've from time to time, and some of it predates me, there have been some opportunities through Public Works to amend an on-street parking bylaw. I'm not sure if Mr. Peaver or Mr. Cornwall would speak to that specifically. I don't know how that works out, but there is a process to allow for an applicant or a developer to utilize a smaller number of parking spaces within the city's right-of-way through bylaw, which would then go to council.
So would we be receiving payment for that?
So in this instance, this parking isn't dedicated to this particular business. It's just general on-street parking. We do see an opportunity that there is a 2-lane, one-way road, Eagle Ave, that there is availability to put some parking spaces there without affecting the traffic flow. We would not ask for like a fee for this, but they would be responsible for the cost of signing and or pavement markings. And if the city wished, we could put parking meters or restrict parking at any future use if we would like.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. So it simply pertains to the commercial aspect of this development. Now, there was also mention, and I must apologize, I may not have been paying full attention, but there was talk about encroachment. Could you elaborate on that?
No, there's no encroachment into the site. The existing lot is quite small at about 1/10 of a hectare, and the city is actually going to be carving off about 1/10 of that site to expand our right-of-way along Erie Ave, as well as implement a 7.5 by 7.5 meter daylight triangle to ensure that this building doesn't block the visibility of the traffic signal.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Councilor Sikoli.
Yes, thank you. If I'm recalling correctly, a few years ago, we had a project, it was like a conversion project and they couldn't accommodate an accessible parking spot and we allowed for an accessible parking spot to be created on the street so that that building would meet the requirement. I'm seeing nodding heads, so this is not unusual that we would look for creative and unique ways to help a developer meet their parking requirements. I'm seeing nodding heads. Yes, that may help. That information may help some of my counselor colleagues in their decision-making process here, if you want to elaborate on that.
Absolutely, through the mayor to Councillor Sokoli. In that particular instance, I think it was off of Elgin. It was an older repurposed church that was being
Yeah.
converted from institutional to residential. And they were shy that accessible parking stall size or space, and they did request to utilize that. I don't know. My recollection is that it never transpired in terms of that happening, but we did lend that as a solution in that instance as well, correct?
I see, that's one of the good things of being a woman. You forget nothing ever. You remember those things. My second question is the commercial part of this. What is it zoned? Is it, because we have those 3 parking spots that are going to be used primarily for the commercial area. I know there was a restaurant in there. Is the zoning going to change? Because if it's a restaurant, the 3 spots might not be enough. If it's an office space, that may be plenty, right? So do we have any idea of the intended use of the commercial space there?
Through the chair, so we don't know what the commercial space is going to look like. That might be a question for the applicant. But the zoning does allow for commercial uses, and I can pull up the.
I don't know, Dora, I don't know if I necessarily need the answer right now, but I'm going to plant that seed with you to work with the developer to make sure that whatever does go in there as far as commercial space is appropriate for the 3 parking spots that we're going to have allocated for that. And that concludes my comments and questions. Thank you.
Councillor Sless.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Still not clear on these 3 parking spots. They're not for the exclusive use of this development, correct? They're public parking spots on a public street. And we're saying it's okay to not dedicate, but to use them to fulfill the obligation of the developer. Am I understanding that correctly? If I wanted to go and park there, I could park there as long as I conform to the time requirements and whatnot of that parking place, correct?
Councillor Sless, you're correct.
Okay, so we're simply saying that because you can't do it, we've got a street there, and with any kind of luck, there'll be some open space there, and if a customer wants to park, they can, but there's no guarantee that there'll be a place for them to park.
Exactly. We're basically giving the variance for 0 parking spaces for the commercial use, with the understanding that their commercial customers will find parking within city streets in parking spaces that are permitted for parking.
Okay. On the 18 parking spaces that are provided on site, are any of those disabled parking?
Yes, there are a total of 18 parking spaces for 20 units. One of them will be an accessible space.
There'll be one there. Okay. And I guess to the planner, are any of the proposed apartment units accessible?
Through the mayor to Councillor Sless. The real response is dependent on, from what we're hearing from the applicant, and I would likely defer this question back to them when they come back up after the public commenting section. But if it was to be rental, I believe the building code does require that one unit, or sorry, 15% of the build out has to be accessible in terms of the unit themselves or units themselves. If this is to go to strict condominium, I don't think there would be any requirement to provide accessible, but I think from a brand or a marketing perspective that, you know, most developers would want to have or include some form of accessible park or accessible dwelling unit.
Okay, thanks for that clarity, Joe. And just a general comment, Has this application been kind of shot through the process quickly? And the reason I ask that, when I look through the comments from the commenting agencies, Bell Canada, Fire, CN, the school boards, Parks and Rec, Enbridge, Hydro One, Six Nations, none have commented. Is that because this has moved so quickly, or is that because they have no comment?
Through the chair, we followed our standard procedure with this application. Commenting agencies were given 4 weeks to provide comments, and they specifically said no comment.
Through the chair to Councillor
Okay.
Slesvig, I would just add that generally speaking, those forms of agencies, they will provide more technical comment at the site plan control stage. So it's not necessarily, you know, unless there's a big showstopper or concern at the rezoning stage or, you know, the official plan amendment stage. That's when they would provide more you know, more feedback comment wise. If they provided us with no comment, they don't have any comment at this time, but doesn't mean that they might not have comment at the site plan control stage.
I appreciate that explanation. Thanks, Joe. And thanks, Dora. Well done, Joe, for your first go at this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carpenter.
Yeah, we have the best planning department in Ontario. The question I would have would be, now there's 18 parking spaces. Are they dedicated to each unit? Do we know? Or to specific units? And are they extra? Is that something you gotta buy as a renter? I guess if you don't know that question, we'll save it for the.
Through the chair, I think that would be best addressed by the applicant.
Okay, and just to the planning staff, I'd like us to at least mention to all development that we would like them to consider 36-inch doors. I wouldn't be, my ward mate wouldn't forgive me if I didn't raise this issue, because it makes the ability for it all to be accessible in the future without renovating major structural issues, but and it costs very little to do it up front. And I know the previous development as well, just an ask. And the second thing I'd like to talk, Councilor Sokoli touched on it, the commercial space. I'd like us to look at what that commercial space is. I mean, we're gonna have 20 units above, say, a restaurant, smelling whatever food is there, or a bar. Makes it very difficult to rent space above a bar if that's what's going to be there. So if there's gonna be rental space above commercial, I'd like us to look at what the uses can be and maybe restrict the uses to uses that are livable for those that would live above them. And that's my only concern. Thank you.
Well, Dora, you've completed your first presentation. Good job. So we'll now move to the public portion. First, I'll ask Lisa, do we have anyone who's registered virtually?
There are no virtual attendees.
Right. And we have received who received any written comment?
Through the chair, I do not have any written comments, and I do not believe the planner on file had received any prior to the distribution of the agenda.
Okay. Can plan just confirm that? Have we received any?
Through the chair, we've received one comment about the access, but it was a misinterpretation of the notice. The resident thought that the exit would be on Erie Avenue, but the one-way exit is actually on Eagle Avenue, and transportation staff provided clarification to the resident.
Great, thanks, Dara. Okay, so I'm going to ask, is there any member of the public present today who would like to speak to this application, either in support of it or in opposition to it, or just making a comment on it? Now is your time to come forward. Seeing no one rushing forward, I'll ask again. Is there any member of the public who is present today in or outside of the council chamber who would like to speak to this application, either in support of it or in opposition to it, or just simply to comment on it? Now is the time to come forward. I'll ask for a third and last time. Is there any member of the public who is present today that would like to speak to this application, either in opposition to it or in support of it? Now is your last opportunity to come forward. All right. So to the applicant, you now have, if you wish, you can respond to the staff presentation, any questions that were raised during the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was taking notes. I think I caught everything that we could maybe clarify or elaborate on, respond to. So the first thing was with respect to the commercial use. What would the commercial use be? As Dora mentioned, there's a variety of commercial uses that would be permitted. So it's, not exactly known what that use would be. But I know that Ina has been in conversation with your economic development department as well to specifically kind of understand perhaps, are there businesses out there looking for this type of space? What would the community need? And, to me, this kind of lends itself to maybe a local commercial serving use, similar to the other businesses that are at this intersection. Just to speak to the parking, we really appreciate the comments from transportation staff. With the 3 parking spaces that would be on the street, that would be created. It's not dissimilar from what's happening kitty corner along Erie with the on-street parking that those businesses can use. We see it as appropriate, kind of this is, an urban node. We're bringing a new building kind of to the intersection that's going to help frame the street and create a new urban node or an improved urban node, I'll say. And this type of on-street parking wouldn't be, very unusual in that type of node or in a downtown, near a downtown area. And just to speak to the question on accessible units, as Mr. Muto pointed out, if the building is rental, I think there'd be about 3 accessible units. We heard from one of the counselors, and considering 36-inch doors, we'll certainly take that back. And the question on whether parking spaces would be charged extra, that hasn't been contemplated. I don't think that that's been evaluated, or whether parking spaces would be in addition to rent rates. But that's certainly something we'll take back as well. But at this point, that's not being contemplated. I think that covered everything, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Carpenter.
Thank you. The parking space issue is important for us. I'll tell you why, because you're talking about the need for rental units, and there is a need for rental units. And thank you for building rental units, especially in this community. The concern for council is that when there's another charge above the rental rate for a parking space, those that can't afford that end up parking on the street. And so it has a large impact on the street parking and streetscape for other residents that live on the street. And we're really loath to support that approach because we've had problems with it in the past. And that's why it would be an important factor to have that really clearly defined in the zoning, one of the requirements in the zoning bylaw, that the parking be included in the rental rate. Now, whether it gets used or not is another matter, but just as opposed to being an extra cost, so that way you don't get to opt out. Thank you.
Not seeing any other questions? Thank you very much for coming forward.
Thanks so much.
Okay. So that completes the public hearing portion of this application. So we now need to make a decision. There is a staff recommended resolution. And Lisa, if you would please share that on the screen for the viewers. And the resolution is essentially to approve the application with a holding provision applied to prevent the development from proceeding until there's a proper streetscape, on-street parking and site plan and functional servicing report. So Councillor Carpenter, you're moving that to get that on the floor. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Sikoli. Floor is open for debate. Councillor Carpenter.
I like to make sure staff puts that caveat in there I said about parking, because then you know why that is, but we can add that in there before it gets to council. I want to make sure that that's dealt with in the sense that we're not having people parking on the street and obstructing the current parking spaces. I'm happy that the developer said about 36 inch doors, just an added a plus for accessibility. The other, I see it's going to have an elevator as well. So the other thing is the building across the street, kitty corner from it, is that 6 stories? I believe that is 6 stories, the one on the directly kitty corner across from it on Erie Ave and Eagle. The one that has the wing masters in the bottom and that we talked about the parking, I believe that is 6 stories.
Through the chair to Councillor Carpenter, I believe it's 3 stories, that building.
Oh, 3 stories. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was much. Oh, are you thinking of one directly beside it? But the one kitty corner, I think, is bigger than, taller than that. Maybe not. Okay. All right. I thought it was. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Councillor Van Tilburg.
Yeah, I believe the adjacent ones are 3 stories. That being said, I was actually mentioned by a member of our staff that this is a small lot. And it is a small lot. And they're trying to do a lot with this small lot. And I think they're just trying to do a little too much on a small lot. And you get to that point where is this a straw? And I have a problem in that landscaped open space, we want 15% and we're saying 4.65. It's good enough. We make exceptions on the side yard abutting of the 5.5 meter, but say it's 0 meters is okay because of the stature of what the building is and what's next to it. You're using up every ounce of space that is a visual for the community. You can't just jam everything in there. So you get to the point where you can't provide what the zoning asks for, which is 1 car per unit. You can't provide then any commercial space for the commercial units. You actually have to come to the city to ask us for some spots. I don't think that this is the right way to go about this. So just because up the road in a different zoning area, which is probably where one should buy if they want the 0.75 ratios, you're in a different area with a different zoning. And that's done for a reason. So we should be keeping to the ratio of what is required. The reason that this is important in this particular area, and I think we've just got an example from the Wingmaster across the road, the city had to go and make some parking available for a building that at one time had no parking. Well, there are many buildings, residential homes that were built prior to automobiles being a thing that have no parking spots. In fact, they have the people on the streets in those homes have to juggle for their parking on the street. And if we say that we're going to build the units and not have enough parking for them, because you can't stop somebody from buying a unit just because the fact that there's no parking available. If somebody needs a place to live and they got a car and they got to go to Cambridge or Woodstock, they're going to buy that unit and they're going to park on the street. That's just the way it's going to be. So it'll be taking up a spot. And I'll tell you, if you talk to the residents there, I mean, they will get mad at one another when visitors come by, there just isn't enough spots. So this is a concern. And I just think that I don't think it's right for us to start asking. Planning should be doing planning. Transportation and roads should be doing roads. And I don't think it's to this point where we should be having this mediation between the two on and doing a development when the development guidelines are right there before us saying what's allowed. So either you have to remove a couple units or make some adjustments, but right now, this build could go up with some changes and meet our criteria. It could. But right now we're asking for just a little bit more. And quite frankly, most of the residential complaints that came at that public meeting were with regards to these changes that we're being requested. while some may not enjoy losing the creamery because it's a fun place to go to, the rest are looking at, how does this building affect us? Many say, not so bad, but our concerns are literally the items that we're having to waive off here. And therefore, I can't waive off these items.
Any further discussion? Yeah, I'll comment on this. I have found Councillor Van Tilborg's argument actually quite persuasive. I tend to agree with you that from a planning perspective, I respectfully disagree with our planning staff. I think the use of the on-street parking space, and I agree the history of this particular neighborhood is they need their on-street parking space because it was all developed back in the day of horse and carriages. So I believe as well that it's an intensification of use. Plus, I also find very persuasive the arguments of the neighborhood that they're losing. I guess, is it a heritage building? Well, our heritage staff and the Heritage Committee says not. But having been there to the creamery on a Saturday afternoon, enjoying some blues bands, it has a history in that neighborhood. If it's not necessarily a heritage icon, it's a cultural icon for the Eagle Place neighborhood, which doesn't have a lot of gathering places. It's kind of like a Cheers. And it'd be great to see a development that incorporates some of that. But instead, what I get a sense of, I'm not saying it's true, but on this application, I get a sense that, well, I'm not inspired that we're soon going to see a building. It has about it, well, I'll just leave it at that. So unlike the prior application, where I think very clear that very shortly we would see building proceeding. But so in this particular application, given the nature of the intensity, the issue of the on-street parking, I don't think it's the highest and best use of this property. I don't think it's a good plan. And also there's the impact in the neighborhood, taking away what is clearly a cultural icon and a neighborhood meeting place. So I'm not going to support it. Councillor Scully.
I am going to support this. And I think we need to differentiate in our heads the difference between a property that has historical relevance and is just a symbolic icon within the community. At the end of the day, the invisible hand of the free market has acted in a way where someone listed a property for sale, somebody purchased it. I do believe this is the highest and best use of this parcel of land. We're going to still maintain our commercial piece that we have there. We're going to create some beautiful new rental units for this neighborhood, which I think is needed. I am going to be supporting this. I don't know why we're operating under this double standard. We approve 0.75 parking spots per unit all the time, particularly in a neighborhood that has such a high walkability score. We've got everything within walking distance here. I will caution and just play devil's advocate with everybody up here because I've heard quite a few times that we talk about not charging for parking. And I do want to just caution that when we don't charge for parking, I see both sides of this, so I'm just going to offer a devil's advocate opinion here that people are going to pay for parking, but what happens is now everybody in that building is going to be charged the same rental rate, and that will include the parking spot cost. And when we look at our yearly inflation rate and raising the rent, now everybody is paying that inflation on the parking spot as well, not just on your rental rate. So I've seen it done both ways with landlords where they charge for rent and then separately for parking, and then they inflate on the rent portion only. But if you include it and you roll it in, now you're paying an inflation rate on your parking spot as well, which adds up over time. So just to play devil's advocate and put that into your mind. So I am going to be supporting this. I think it is highest and best use. Sad to see the creamery go, but it is what it is. Someone sold a piece of land. We should be looking at the owner that previously owned this, who sold it. And that's just what it is. Somebody came in, they have an idea for it, and now it's before us. So I don't think we should be holding on to what it was. It's not going to be that anymore. It's sold. So looking forward to the future, I'm going to be supporting this today.
Councillor Sluss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was inclined to support this application until I heard from the councillor from the area, and he made a convincing and compelling case that this is not in the best interest of the folks that he represents. What I would say is, if one story was taken off this building, eliminating 4 units, that would also eliminate 4 potential parking spots, and we would then have 16 units and 18 parking spots, which is a little more robust of a parking plan. And if it came back in that form, I would support it. But based on what I've heard today, and based on the ward councillor's comments, the application before us is not supportable from my perspective. So I'll be voting in the negative as well, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Great. Not seeing any further hands raised for debate, we'll call the vote.
Item 4.2 fails on a recorded vote of 1 to 4. Those voting in favor, Councillor Sokoli. Those opposed, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sluss, Carpenter, and Van Tilburg.
So we do need to have a resolution on the floor dealing with this. And actually, Councillor Sokoli, would you mind taking the chair and I'll put forward a resolution?
Are we looking at, yes, I will take the chair, but
Because right now we don't have anything on this application.
we have to add a reason to why we're denying this, correct?
Well, I'll tell you what we need to do. And so my resolution seeking a seconder is that zoning bylaw amendment application PZ 1623 submitted by MPG Planning Solutions. So it's very similar to the preamble of former resolution, affecting the land municipally addressed as 7579 Erie Avenue to rezone from floodplain general commercial zone exception 19 to holding floodplain general commercial zone exception 106 with site-specific provisions to permit a 6-story mixed-use building containing ground floor commercial area of 148 meters and 20 dwelling units be refused. And B, that the reasons for the refusal are as follows. The proposed development as presented is not considered good land use planning. B, the proposed development offends the character and culture of the neighborhood. C, the proposed level of intensification is excessive. And lastly, the proposed development does not provide for adequate parking.
And do you have a seconder for that? I see Councillor Carpenter has seconded that. Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk will call the vote on the amendment, correct? Is this an amendment technically, or is it just a whole new, it's a whole new resolution on the
Through
floor,
the chair,
correct?
this
Okay.
is now a main
Okay.
motion.
So seeing no discussion, we'll call the vote on.
And the motion to refuse the application for 4.2 carries on a recorded vote of 4 to 1. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sluss, Carpenter, and Van Tilburg. Those opposed, Councillor Sokoli.
So that concludes the statutory planning portion of the meeting. Now, we don't have any presentations or delegations. We don't have any, we have a notice of motion. I think that's actually a resolution. Councillor Carpenter, do you have a resolution you'd like to bring forward?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I move a resolution that section 15.11.5 of chapter 15 of the City of Brantford Municipal Code be waived in order to introduce the following resolution without prior notice of motion. And this would be whereas some developments do not move forward and apply for building permits after planning applications have been approved by the municipality. And whereas these stalled developments have unused water and sewer servicing capacity and allocations, and are not contributing to the housing supply in a timely manner. And whereas the proposed changes to the Planning Act under Bill 185 include a new use it or lose it tool for municipalities. And whereas this tool will expand the scope of lapsing provisions requiring municipalities to impose a lapsing condition for all draft subdivisions, condominium, and site plan control approvals. And whereas this tool will provide an incentive for developers and builders to move forward on approved application before the approval lapses. Now therefore be resolved that the City of Brantford express support for the proposed new use it or lose it tool for municipalities in the Planning Act, and that the Brantford City Council requests the proposed new use it or lose it tool to be expanded to include zoning applications, and that the city clerk be directed to provide a copy of this resolution to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, and Will Boma, MPP Brant, and I'll add AMO as well to this.
So the discussion at this point is to why waive the rules.
And I can
Not have a
speak to
notice
waive,
motion.
the reason we're waiving the rules is the province is looking at Bill 185 going to third reading, or is it first reading in June, and we'd like to make sure that this point of view from our municipality is included before they make that final or first draft of the proposal coming up in June. We won't have another opportunity to do that. That's why I'm asking to waive the rules.
All right, any further discussion on the waiver of rules? Not, I'll call the vote on the waiver of rules, and this will require a 2/3 vote.
The motion to waive the rules carries on a vote of 5-0. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sokoli, Sless, Carpenter, Van Tilburg.
All right. So Councillor Carbon, you want to put it back on the floor with the
Yeah,
same
it's
seconder?
back on the floor
Well, it's
without
on the
me
floor without the,
having to read it again.
right.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the mayor for this. Actually, while I'm presenting it, the mayor raised this today, earlier with the discussion with Councillor Van Tilburg and I. And we all share the same concerns that we've approved a lot of development applications in the city over the last little while, and staff done a lot of work on these applications, tremendous work. We've got one of the best planning departments in the province of Ontario. I keep saying that. We're meeting targets to getting things approved, but the developers aren't coming forward and actually building. And we don't want to be in the process or in the role of providing development approvals for land applications that really just increase the value of land for someone to flip that to somebody else and actually never see anything built. And this doesn't benefit the city one bit. It doesn't provide more housing, doesn't provide more apartments. It just provides the person that did the application form and went through the planning process an ability to either double or triple their money, which I'm not opposed to someone making money, but I'm opposed to development land sitting idle and not being developed. And we need housing, we need this development. We need the tax revenue, quite frankly, on the infill projects. So that's what this is for. And I thank the mayor for bringing this forward. And that's my seconder is Councillor Van Tilburg.
Councillor Van Tilburg.
Very happy to second this and very happy that the mayor had the conversation with us earlier today, bringing this forward. I had spoke with staff probably a week to 2 weeks ago, literally about this issue, that in my ward, in my time, I've probably never seen more development in the last 4 years than I did in the first 8. And it's not even close. And one of the consequences of that is that land is purchased. Many times tenants are evicted, put in a position where they have to leave. Then the buildings are left idle. Then the buildings are vandalized and they can sit for a significantly long period of time. And then we get caught into 2 spots. Either it's taken a very, 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 very long time for a development to happen, or it's not going to happen. And we've just got ourselves into a bigger pickle because we have more people displaced and looking, and we're not providing the capacity that we said we would provide. So I had wanted to bring forward a resolution, and then it wasn't mentioned to me that Ford government's coming down on this pathway, which could possibly change everything as long as the buildings get built, as long as we get that capacity. So for us to say that we support what they're doing, I think it's very important that that is heard so that they know exactly where we're coming from and that there's a good understanding of why this should be done.
Councillor
Sokoli. Yeah, I wish I had a little bit more notice on this to do some research, but I understand that things pop up and we have to address them without notice. But I would like to do a little more research on this. But outwardly, from what I've read of what's before me, you know, I think this is incredibly important. This was a a very bold step by the Ford government that I'm appreciative of. And I think having so many applications looming over our head makes long-range planning as far as our infrastructure, transportation, transit, makes it almost impossible. When you don't really know what the intention of the developer is this, we're gonna get an approval and flip it, or are we actually going to see, 1,500 houses pop up in this area? So this is important. There's a lot more that I just been Googling on my phone quickly, reading into it, that I want to research a little bit deeper. But all in all, from what I'm seeing, it looks like a great thing. I'm happy to show support for this. I think it's incredibly important for us municipalities while we're planning and allocating precious staff time to certain projects to have an idea of what's actually coming. So full support. Thanks for whoever worked on this and brought it forward. Happy to support it.
Councillor Sluss.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and congratulations for bringing this forward. If my calculation is correct, we've got about 30, at least approaching 30 high-rise buildings have been approved, but nothing's in the ground. And when we've done that, staff have put, as been said, countless hours. There's countless resources been put to this, countless expense to the city to move these applications forward through the process to the point where they've been approved. It's also a strain on our resources as far as infrastructure. Allocations are made to proposed buildings, assuming they're going to be built, and it starts eating up capacity that we don't really know if it's going to be used or not used. As was said, it increases the value of the land for the person that went through the process and got the approval, but it does nothing to satisfy the need for housing or to help the city reimburse the great expense we go through with our planning department to bring these things to fruition. So I think it's a timely move. It's something that has to happen. I know because of interest rates and building costs and construction costs that folks have been reluctant to get the shovel in the ground real quick. They're looking for some movement in the economy, and I understand that. But by the same token, we're all in the same ship. We're just on different wavelengths, I guess, and it just doesn't make sense for the city to keep going through the process, but nothing coming out the other end. So I'm pleased to support it. I congratulate the mayor for bringing it forward, and I certainly hope that it is contemplated and approved at the provincial level. Thank you.
Yes, I want to thank very much planning staff who helped. Well, essentially, they prepared it this morning when I asked if they would consider doing it. And it is an issue. It's a provincial issue. It's of much debate in many larger cities that are seeing the situation similar to us, where you have a number of planning applications, some of them with an intent to build as soon as possible and construct much needed, whether it's industrial space, commercial, many times housing space, and thus justifying the use of scarce resources here at City Hall and reviewing and approving their applications. But we've seen too many that, you look at it in retrospect and you think, was this simply brought to increase the value of the property, either for land inventory holding or for other remortgaging financing purposes, or just to increase the wealth of the corporation or the developer, where there's really no intent to build other than to hold and sell it and flip it at some future point. So we're talking about a land speculator. And I really feel strongly, given what we've seen over the last 7-8 years, that when you have a land speculator that does this, many times you'll just see the property just sit vacant or abandoned for many, many years before someone else comes along and buys it and actually moves the application forward. We've seen that in a couple of different locations. So you have a building that, although not in perfect condition, in many situations was occupied. And then once the speculator obtains the zoning they want, it just sits there, usually vacant, usually torn down to reduce the property tax value of the property. So I feel quite strongly that it's not our obligation. We're not here to make people rich. We're here to see that our community improves, and that when this committee and this council decides to grant a rezoning or a subdivision approval, that it's going to proceed to benefit the entire community and also the builder developer that's doing it. So I was very pleased to see the province bring forward this bill. The one provision in that bill is that it would only apply to the use it or lose would only apply to waste allocations, water and waste treatment allocations. And the problem with that is That means it catches it at the site plan control stage, which is where allocations are usually granted. But if you have someone that's speculating, they never bring it to site plan control. They just let it sit there once they got the rezoning and the increase in the value of the property. So I feel quite strongly the province should include in the legislation what we've suggested here in C, that actually it's B, that they add that use it or lose it provision to something like we've seen today, which is rezoning applications, much of which are infills, so that those who apply know they're going to have to build within a certain period of time without a really good excuse. And we're not going to, as a society, province, or city, tolerate those who do this and just let it sit there. And I think this is a good thing. And I think it also aligns with what our community expects us to be able to do. So I'm supporting it. Councilor Carpenter.
Just one more, I think we're all in agreement that we want to have the buildings built, and when we do all the work here, staff do all the work, we do all the work to make sure that we're working with developers and building housing in our community and moving our community forward, and it's tax dollars for us as well. But there was a comment about, I get the comment that the interest rates may have an impact on developers, but I've never in my life ever experienced the cost of building anything to go down. Never have I ever seen that. I've been around a while. So if a developer's waiting for the cost to build going down, I don't believe that's true or possible. But I do believe, and I've seen it in my career with council, where a developer would come to us and make an application for 1 million square foot industrial property. And we give the zoning for such. Of course, I did not, I voted against that, but the zoning passed. And then the developer used that property to then remortgage it for millions of dollars. More, it was 5 or 10 times more the value after we zoned it than it was before, and then really simply just use the money to borrow and build other things. And I've seen it locally. I've seen there's a couple apartment buildings that we've approved, and I know that that developer is building in other cities, but not here. So using that value of that property to borrow extra money from the bank maybe, or finance, whatever that may be, to put towards other projects in other communities. So I'm one that will criticize any government, and you've heard me criticize the Ford government on lots of issues, but I also give them credit where credit is due. And this is the right direction for them to be moving down. They want to get housing built, put some provisos in there so that we can get the housing built. There are other areas where they're working on that are doing good things, and I'll mention that when it comes forward at the time. But this is one area that we think we can ask. I'd like to ask the mayor as well, bring it forward to your larger mayor caucus meetings when you have them. I know you are very robust in speaking at those meetings. You take a leadership role at those meetings. I look forward to this being raised there as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'll call the vote. Lisa?
The resolution carries on a recorded vote of 5-0. Those voting in favor, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sokoli, Sless, Carpenter, Van Tilburg.
All right, so that concludes the business of the May Planning Committee meeting.